In this pod-slice summary of the Diary of a CEO podcast, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken and Stephen Bartlett have a riveting conversation discussing the pervasive effects of ultra-processed food on global health. Dr. Tulleken highlights that a staggering 75% of all calories consumed globally come from only 6 companies, a de facto food mafia that significantly influences people's diets. They engineer food to be irresistibly palatable and consequently overconsumed. This diet trend is not merely a health issue, but rather a sweeping pandemic causing diet-related diseases around the world. Tulleken notes that 1 in 5 people in the UK derive 80% of their calories from ultra-processed food. He stresses that an unhealthy diet now surpasses tobacco as the leading cause of premature death globally. He points out that children in the UK are predicted to be 9 centimeters shorter due to dietary issues and emphasizes that physical stunting includes cognitive stunting as well. Discussing the complexity of the obesity problem, Tulleken criticizes the simplistic narrative of personal responsibility, insisting that it's a matter of social justice and poverty-related factors causing diet-related diseases. According to him, if poverty was eliminated, we would solve around 60% of the diet-related disease problem. He argues that rich people generally opt for healthier food because they can afford it, while poor people are often forced to rely on harmful, ultra-processed food. Thus, the debate should not be about calories in and calories out, but rather the structural societal issues surrounding accessible and healthy food options. Tulleken goes into the history of food environment changes, citing the 1970s as the launching point for the obesity pandemic. This time period marked the industrialization of the food supply, characterized by the ubiquity of ultra-processed, convenient, and inexpensive food options. He points out that a few corporations took control of the food systems. Today, 75% of the food calories consumed globally come from a mere 6 companies. The nutritionist-turned-economist researcher criticizes the financialization of the food industry, pointing out the disconnection between financial incentives for these companies and public health. He argues that this disregard creates significant nutrition and health problems for the global population. In this portion of the Diary of a CEO podcast, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken delves into detail about the different types of food: unprocessed, processed, and ultra-processed. Unprocessed foods can be naturally consumed like an apple or an oyster, whereas processed foods are typically defined by their method of preservation, such as butter or cheese. This kind of food processing has shaped human evolution. Minimal teeth and short guts are a result of mankind's need to extend digestive tracts into kitchens, transforming food out of its natural state. However, Dr. Tulleken highlights the most significant issue with ultra-processed foods. These are the products of the financialized, industrial American diet that rely heavily on commoditized ingredients like corn, wheat, rice, and soy. These ingredients are broken down into powders and pastes, combined with additives, and then fashioned into products that can last a long shelf life. They are designed to maximize profit from cheap ingredients and provide high value by turning waste products into food additives. Van Tulleken explains that while some additives can be harmful, the most significant damage comes from the food's composition. These ultra-processed foods are typically energy-dense, soft, and quick to consume, leading to overeating before you even feel full. Additionally, their lack of phytonutrients and continuous engineering to boost palatability results in what many people experience as irresistible, dangerously addictive foods. One telling example, Dr. Tulleken points out, is Diet Coke, which is marked as a health food due to its low fat, saturated fat, sugar, and salt content. Yet upon examining the ingredients, consumers could find an unexpected food additive color and artificial sweeteners that may even be more metabolically harmful than sugar. They essentially constitute a nutritional lie, falsely signifying to our bodies that refined carbs are on the way, wreaking havoc on our metabolic responses. This discussion underscores the reality that ultra-processed foods are not designed with our health in mind, but rather the financial bottom line, leading to a diet that is overwhelmingly high in addictive, nutrient-poor, and potentially harmful ingredients. As such, Van Tulleken emphasizes the importance of being cognizant of this when making food choices. Dr. Chris Van Tulleken delves deeper into the negative impacts of ultra-processed foods in this part of the Diary of a CEO podcast, taking particular aim at artificially sweetened drinks. Although these beverages are often marketed as healthier alternatives to sugar-filled drinks, Van Tulleken shares findings from the World Health Organization that suggest sweeteners are no more beneficial than sugar when it comes to weight loss. On top of this, they can also negatively affect our microbiome and confuse our metabolic responses. Examining other commonly consumed products, Van Tulleken adds that even breakfast cereals, often marketed as healthy due to their fiber and vitamin content, fall into the category of ultra-processed foods and can be associated with negative health outcomes. With added vitamins and minerals, these foods create a false health halo. Yet the human body doesn't absorb these added nutrients in the same way it does from real, unprocessed foods. Continuing the discussion, Van Tulleken highlights a widely ignored issue: the addictive nature of ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods are engineered to be overconsumed, leading to weight gain, increased connectivity between behavior and reward centers in the brain, and a malfunctioning sense of satiety. Such effects can be particularly troubling when it comes to children's consumption of such foods. In an experiment, Van Tulleken adopted an 80% ultra-processed food diet, a common dietary practice in the UK. The results were unsettling: large weight gain in a short time, changes in brain activity, heightened levels of hunger hormones after eating, and an overall resistance to stopping food consumption, even when satiated. Van Tulleken also points out that there seems to be a link between the consumption of ultra-processed foods and the rise in mental health diagnoses across different age groups and demographics. Although it is a complex area requiring further investigation, this connection points to the far-reaching impacts of a diet heavily reliant on ultra-processed foods. Not only are these foods harmful for physical health, but they could also potentially undermine mental well-being. In the Diary of a CEO podcast, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken further develops the notable correlation between ultra-processed foods and both physical and mental health issues. He details his personal experiment of adopting an 80% ultra-processed food diet. The effects were concerning as he felt compelled to eat even when satiated, suffered from noticeable weight gain, increased anxiety, and disrupted sleep patterns. Dr. Van Tulleken also points out an alarming statistic from the World Obesity Federation. It predicts that within the next 12 years, 51% of the world's population, more than 4 billion people, will be overweight or obese. The cause he identifies is not necessarily individual behavior, but rather the largely unregulated and pervasive food environment. Van Tulleken argues for better regulation that increases freedom and choice rather than stigmatizing obesity. Accessibility to healthy, affordable food should be a right rather than privilege, especially considering evidence that humans, when left to their own devices, can balance their nutritional needs effectively, as seen in groundbreaking experiments conducted by scientist Clara Davis in the 1920s. Going against the notion of better personal choices, Dr. Van Tulleken cites the reality of low-income households that often lack the basic resources and appliances to prepare fresh foods. He is distinctly against blaming these individuals for systemic failings, focusing instead on how changes to the food system can promote health and reduce suffering. Dr. Van Tulleken also reiterates the cultural and community implications of food. From party snacks to school lunches, ultra-processed foods are embedded in our social interactions and norms. While individuals can certainly make efforts to improve their diets, major public health improvements hinge on broader societal changes that need to be addressed. Presented with the enduring debate of calorie intake and expenditure, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken openly challenges the simplistic view of calories in, calories out within weight loss discussions. He conveys the intricate relationship between genes, food consumption, and physical activity, comparing the temptation of ultra-processed food to the allure of addictive substances like cigarettes and alcohol. This further bolsters the argument for an individual's predisposition to find certain food more irresistible, distancing away from the theory of sole willpower. Dr. Van Tulleken intriguingly introduces research by scientist Herman Pontzer, who observed that increasing physical activity doesn't necessarily result in greater calorie expenditure, introducing the fixed energy model. This model suggests that exercise reallocates our calorie budget away from processes like inflammation, anxiety, and hormone production, and toward physical activity itself. Thus, while exercise can contribute to health, it's not necessarily the silver bullet for weight loss. Adding another layer to the already complex mechanism of weight regulation, Dr. Van Tulleken debates the concept of willpower, citing twin studies that explore the heritability of obesity. His colleague, Claire Llewellyn, highlighted that the interaction between genes and environment significantly impacts the expression of weight-related genes, showing that people from low-income households are more likely to express obesity-related genes owing to the stress of poverty. These findings shift the narrative from one of individual self-control to a broader perspective on how societal and systemic factors are major players in the obesity crisis. Building upon societal implications of obesity, Dr. Van Tulleken reflects on his personal experiences while traveling in America, drawing attention to the omnipresence of market-driven food choices. Through this, he underscores the pervasive tactics of food marketing targeted towards vulnerable populations, especially teenagers. The normalization of marketing for addictive, ultra-processed products exemplifies key systemic issues that contribute to obesity and overweight in children and adolescents. This critical exploration of obesity regulation dives deep into genetic predispositions, stress of poverty, omnipresent marketing strategies, and the societal norms around consumption of ultra-processed foods. Understanding this complexity helps dismantle the reductionist calorie-counting approach to weight loss and shifts the focus towards multidimensional systemic changes. As Dr. Van Tulleken continues in his conversation with Stephen Bartlett, he delves deeper into the realities of our relationship with food, confidently asserting that it's far from simply a game of willpower. He shares a poignant recollection of his brother gaining weight due to the stress of studying abroad, combined with living above a burger joint. His choice to eat his problems, he explains, wasn't a lack of willpower, but a perfect storm of stress, convenience, and genetic inclination acting in synergy. One topic that deeply resonates with both is the alarming lack of control consumers have in our current food landscape. Dr. Van Tulleken speaks about the power food companies wield over individuals' diets, labeling our current situation as a nanny state, controlled by transnational corporations rather than governments. Controversially, he stresses the need for consumers to adopt an activist stance in response. Victimhood isn't a badge that appeals to many, but recognizing the pervasive influence of the food industry can fuel urgency for personal transformation and systemic change. He further emphasizes the addictive qualities of ultra-processed foods, likening them to substances like tobacco or alcohol. This addiction is specifically related to how quickly these foods can deliver their hit of pleasure and satisfaction. The alarming rise in health issues, such as ADHD and eating disorders, calls for urgent investigation of this link between ultra-processed foods and our overall mental health. Through an exploration of ultra-processed foods and their impact on obesity, Dr. Van Tulleken firmly advocates for an overhaul of how we see food. From understanding that our susceptibility to obesity is not simply reduced to willpower, to recognizing the importance of being mindful about ultra-processed foods and their potential link to addiction and health disorders, Dr. Van Tulleken helps us to reshape our perception of health, nutrition, and societal habits. Echoing the sentiment of empowerment, Stephen Bartlett suggests that awareness is the first pivotal step to taking back control from the unseen powers that have usurped it. Knowledge, he coincides with Dr. Van Tulleken, is the strongest tool we can arm ourselves with to navigate the nuanced terrain of nutrition, health, and wellness. In conclusion, Dr. Van Tulleken's discussion hinges on the intricate relationship between our societal structures, genetic makeup, and personal choices in shaping our health. It demands the attention of every individual seeking to understand and improve their health, lighting a beacon for reformation of a deeply flawed system, and offering an empowering guide on how to reclaim the reins. Armed with knowledge and a comprehensive view of food and health, everyone can become their own responsible and informed advocate. In this insightful segment, Dr. Van Tulleken discusses how his relationship with food shifted over the course of writing his book. He communicates the challenging journey from addiction to disgust, relating it to how lovers can drastically fall out of love. Continuing his comparison of ultra-processed foods with substances of addiction, he expresses his view that these foods have stopped being food in the raw sense. They have become something uncanny, almost food, but not quite nourishing enough to be called so. He strongly states that ultra-processed foods, despite having the color and the appeal, lack substantial nutritional value and contain harmful addictive substances. They exist to fuel the financial growth of the food industry more than for the well-being of its consumers. Because of this, he no longer views such foods as food at all. As their discussion progresses, he draws striking comparisons between his view on ultra-processed foods and the tobacco industry. He argues that just as society managed to drastically reduce smoking rates through regulation, it may be possible to reduce the consumption of harmful ultra-processed foods as well. Despite tobacco companies still profiting through various means, the general public health has seen notable improvements. Bartlett chimes in, recalling his personal experience with food growing up. He notices a stark contrast between his older brothers, who were raised on home-cooked meals, and himself, the youngest and more exposed to the world of processed foods. Bartlett even correlates this eating habit to their differences in stature and academic performance. Dr. Van Tulleken admits that it's not the first time he's heard such cases, though they're typically anecdotes rather than scientific evidence. However, he's particularly intrigued by Bartlett's story and believes it necessitates further investigation in a broader context. Finally, Dr. Van Tulleken stresses the need to respect people's food choices and give them the agency to make decisions for their health. He shares how his relationship with his brother improved once he stopped judging his eating habits. He acknowledges that everyone has unique motivations and thresholds for initiating drastic lifestyle changes, and these moments of clarity are often self-driven and not imposed from outside. In this part of the discussion, Dr. Van Tulleken showcases his indignation about how our choices are influenced by the food environment, making it seem less like a choice and more like a forced decision due to limitations set by the industry. One of his profound statements revolves around the concept that we need a little bit of discomfort in our diet. He emphasizes the importance of having nutritious foods which require effort to prepare and consume. For him, the switch to seeing food preparation as a bonding activity linking us to our ancestors rather than a mere chore is crucial. The dialogue turns towards the grounds for pessimism, where he reflects on the lengthy fight against the tobacco industry and draws parallels to the battle against ultra-processed foods. The lag between knowledge of harm and adequate regulation, besides the continuous arms race after regulatory success, gives him cause for hesitation. But on the flip side, the non-profit food companies acting as a source of sustainable activism give him hope. In the closing tradition of the podcast, Steve Bartlett asks Chris Van Tulleken about what we would regret in 10 years concerning our children's upbringing today. Chris responds with a reflective, almost melancholic statement about the quality time given to family. He acknowledges that he's already experiencing this regret and needs to become better at offering the kind of enriched, engaging, meaningful presence to his children that he does for his work or other engagements. This podcast episode provides a lot of grounded, thought-provoking perspectives. The power that the food industry has over our lifestyle choices is clear, and the fight for better health seems dire, but not hopeless. Meanwhile, Chris's personal reflection on parenting serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of dedicated and meaningful time with loved ones. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.